which ultimately resulted in a successful negotiation, I think, and which we need to bear in mind, is that they stated that once we start talking, we are not going to stop talking. So although there were endless incidents of Colombian police officials being kidnapped, tortured, killed by the Revolutionary Army, and the Revolutionary Army's cadres being maltreated by the government forces, they decided that now that we have started talking, we are not going to stop talking until we find some kind of an answer. Then they took more years to settle what we were going to talk about than they took to talk about it. It took them 3 or 4 years to arrive at what they called a general agreement, which has been translated from Spanish sometimes into global agreement. So if you look up what happened in Colombia, you'll find these interchangeable words, global and general. Perhaps in Spanish, the word is the same for both. In that, they first determined certain principles which would govern the future relationship. And then the specific 6 subjects, actually 5 subjects plus 1, and I'll tell you why in a minute why it was 5 subjects plus 1. The 5 subjects they would discuss and come to conclusions on. The 6th was a mechanism for monitoring the implementation of the agreement. So you sometimes read of it as a 5-point thing, sometimes as a 6-point. And these they set up separate working groups for. And these separate working groups picked up the biggest issue of all, which was land. What the Colombians had decided in the 1940s was that land holdings were too small, and therefore they should be consolidated under zamindars, who were called the latifundia. And this movement against the consolidation of land was run by the peasants. And the Americans saw this as a move to bring communism into Latin America. So they provided the arms and the training and very often the personnel who would help the Colombian government to suppress the peasant rising. And as a result of the assassination in 1948, the same year as Mahatma Gandhi, of the man who was leading that peasant insurrection, anger got so much, just like in Kashmir. You do something wrong, and then more and more force is used to impose it, and it only leads to more and more opposition. It led to the creation of this army, this revolutionary army in 1964. So they said, the first subject is what we in India call Indian land reform, and what in Colombia is called rural reform. So it's a common subject, rural reform and rural development. That was the main grievance, and they were going to settle that by mutual negotiation. The second major point arose from the sort of problems we are seeing between different categories of Kashmiris and their relationship with India. It was what is going to be the legitimate political role of the insurrectionists after the agreement. So the political participation of everyone who is involved in Kashmir in the future politics, the parliamentary politics of Kashmir, of Jammu Kashmir Assembly and of India has a close parallel to that. There were other issues that were perhaps specific to Colombia, including the drug question, which is a very major question there. And while it's a big question in Punjab, I don't think it's yet an excessively serious problem in Kashmir. So we don't have to take every subject that they took. But what are the issues? To just decide what are the principles on which we will deal with the issues, and then decide what are the issues on which we'll arrive at an agreement. It took them 4 years. And then it took them under 2 years to settle what all the issues would be, to sign the agreement, and set up a joint monitoring mechanism to ensure that what had been agreed would actually be implemented. So, when you get a Nobel Prize for doing that, for a 50-year armed insurrection, if the problem in Kashmir is 50 or 60 years old, or even take it as 70 years old, there is a way forward if we are ready to adopt it. And I think it's a rather long way to Colombia, because it's literally at the other end of the world. But maybe we'll be able to come to Kashmir via Colombia, because there has to be a clear understanding of what are the procedures. Equally, I'll try not to take too much longer. Equally, to draw from, again, my experience in the Indian Foreign Service, I landed in Hanoi in 1968 on the day that that Lyndon Johnson declared a total bombing halt over North Vietnam. And I heard this on the transistor in Vientiane Airport. And when I landed in Hanoi, I thought there'd be a lot of celebrations going on. But the city was dead, completely dead. And then next morning, because I know a fair amount of French, the only job I could think of was to compare the French translation with the English original of Ho Chi Minh's reaction. And I found the only difference was that there was one sentence which was underlined in French but not underlined in the original English, which was the sentence, quote, we shall fight on till we have swept the last aggressor from our soil. So I said that if, on checking his English statement, Ho Chi Minh had said, there's something wrong here, underline this, then it must have a special significance. And that was the month in which the Americans and the Vietnamese, the North Vietnamese, were able to arrive at an agreement as to who would be the participants and what would be the procedure. In other words, talks about talks. And they decided that every Thursday they would meet in a building called the Hotel Majestic. It's not the French word for a mansion is hotel. It's not this kind of residential hotel. So in this mansion called the Majestic, they would meet every Thursday. And from the time they took that decision till they arrived at an agreement, whether they had anything to say to each other or not, they would always meet every single Thursday. And while they were meeting every single Thursday, there were huge developments that took place, which I don't want to go into detail. But the Christmas bombings of 1972 took place, when in a period of 10 days, there were more bombs dropped over tiny little North Vietnam than over the whole of Europe by both sides in the Second World War. But then Thursday they met. Now this led to an agreement. And ultimately it led to a joint Nobel Prize for Henry Kissinger, who just didn't deserve it, and Le Duc Tho, who did. Le Duc Tho rejected it, and Henry Kissinger picked it up. This Prince of War became a Prince of Peace. But that was how the Americans were defeated and driven out. Now I say, if you'd have the courage to shoot a Pakistani soldier, why don't you have the courage to sit across the table with him? Now, we were told that there are many institutions in Pakistan which have a vested interest in being against us. My question on that is, if that is so, why is it that they have never shied away from talking to us? It's always we who've shied away from talking to them. The army has perhaps retained its right to accept or reject a settlement, but it hasn't stood in the way of a discussion taking place. They've had 2 elections in Pakistan for their parliament, what they call the National Assembly, in which no party other than the Jamaat-e-Islami raised the question of Kashmir. And the Jamaat-e-Islami got 2 seats. That's all. It never gets more than that. And the 2 seats it gets are from Karachi, where the whole lot are Mahajirs who keep saying कि मुझे visa जो मुझे Sultanpur जाना है. Yeah, they want to go to Moradabad. They talk about places like this as if they were talking about Paris or New York. I used to sit there and wonder, why do they want to go to these filthy streets? But their heart is here, but their vote goes to the Jamaat-e-Islami. Why do we take it so seriously? If there is a huge constituency for peace in the subcontinent, it is the people of Pakistan. There is a much larger proportion of Pakistanis who want to have a settlement with India than we have here in India. And the proof of that is that when P. Chidambaram, as Home Minister, carried proposals to the Indian cabinet of Dr. Manmohan Singh for entering into a kind of open-ended dialogue with Kashmiris, the cabinet of India didn't give him permission. He's now confessed this or revealed it. So we don't seem to have a constituency in India which is in any way comparable to the constituency in Pakistan that is talking peace. And now we have a situation where friends of mine like Amitabh Mattu thought that the best result of all was the 2015 result in Kashmir. 2015 or 2014? 2014 result in Kashmir, where no government could be formed without Jammu and Kashmir coming together. And that since Jammu was, with a few exceptions, absolutely in the hands of the BJP, and Kashmir's largest party was the PDP, that this joint government would find a joint solution. But I think every Kashmiri would agree with me that it has been a disastrous experiment, that if the Congress was very incompetent and was at the base of what you said in 2004, the hesitancy of Dr. Manmohan Singh, and then in 2010, the outbreak of the most serious disturbance in a long period in Kashmir, you yourselves, the Kashmir representatives, including Mr. Comrade Tarigami, have said that the situation has never been as bad as it is now. So when we have such a situation, if we sit back and say, I've got more pellets than they have, if I've got more pellets...
No, I just wanted to say, I'd like to say 1 minute after his speech.
I hope, Justice Raj, I'll try and cut my remarks short so as to hear you, sir. If that is the situation, then we had a golden opportunity over the last 3 or 4 months. That's coming to an end. That when the winter snows settled, I once quoted a line from the first verse of, I'm sure Bhatt Sahab will recognize this, of T.S. Eliot's poem, which is called The Wasteland, in which he said, winter covered us in forgetful snow. So there was all this forgetful snow over the valley. When the weather ensured that nobody would come out on the streets, you could have talked to them then. And now the snows are melting. The kids are getting ready. The mothers are getting apprehensive. And you neither talk then nor do you talk now. And you say you're modifying your pellets to use against Kashmiri children but not against Haryanvi adults. This is not the way to go forward. We completely stopped talking to the Pakistanis. We completely stopped talking to the Kashmiris. And unless we listen to the wise words of Professor Butt and say that I have as much courage or more courage to talk to him than to shoot at him, I don't know how we'll ever find a solution. So the answer lies in 2 sets of dialogue. One between Delhi and Islamabad, and another between Delhi and Srinagar. And I don't think one should precede the other. Kabuli Sahab will forgive me. I think they should go on parallel tracks, and they should keep each other informed of what is happening on those tracks. And the common factor between the two should be that both dialogues are uninterrupted and uninterruptible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Just a couple of minutes, please. No, I'll come to him. Tarigami sir. He said he just want.
You see, I have not say much. I have heard wonderful comments and suggestions from our seniors here. But my point is, you see, somewhere we have to begin with. Whatever the realities are, we have to face them. And now, as far as India is concerned, Indian state is concerned, Indian government is concerned, we all of us know the directions, the utterances are their projections, at least as far as Kashmir is concerned. And similarly, I don't, I beg to differ a little that there is a controversy in India as well about peace with Pakistan, about peace in Kashmir, a dignified peace in Kashmir. I do believe, I was really, that's why I mentioned that only 2 days before, when that person who killed that governor, there were a huge number of people who were there. And you see, my point is that we are complementing each other. If there is hate campaign here, there is hate campaign there, and there is hate campaign somewhere, these are complementary factors. That's why I posed a question. Somewhere we have to begin with. Can we wait? Should we wait for a longer period from something coming up from the government of India, or something coming from government of Pakistan, or both of them together? Professor Sahab, I wanted that somewhere some consensus needs to be built up in Jammu and Kashmir as well. That consensus will provide you some opportunity here in the rest of the region that you can build up some consensus here as well. We are not a consensus. We are in our personal capacities here. We are other individuals, maybe representing some small fractions of the society.